The economic crisis in Sri Lanka is so bad now that hospitals are unable to perform surgeries on little children. I'm Barkha, you're with the Mojo story. Let's take you through the key developments of this unfolding crisis right in our neighborhood, one that isn't getting the attention it should. Sri Lanka's economic crisis is the worst that the country has seen in its history. Foreign Minister Shankar is in Sri Lanka, and India is opening a line of credit immediately, rushing to Sri Lanka's help. But as always, there is geopolitics at the heart of this as well. China has long had entrenched influence in Sri Lanka, and now it will be intriguing to see how Sri Lanka moves forward with Indian help, Chinese help, or both. Of course, there is a humanitarian crisis at the heart of this all, and there is the question of how India should respond. That is our big focus on the broadcast this evening. Let's go across and now to our special panel of experts. And I would like to share with our audience that things in Sri Lanka are so bad that a veteran journalist from Sri Lanka who has been trying to actually connect with us over the last 60 minutes has no internet at his house that is working. His mobile data is not working as well. And we hope to have him as soon as we can dial him in. This is the situation with almost everybody we've been trying to get connected to in Sri Lanka. So if you do not see a Sri Lankan voice on our program, it is only for this reason. But we still hope to have Iqbal with us very soon in the program. In the meantime, let me introduce our panel of experts as we ask how India should respond. We're joined by military veteran Major General Ashok Kumar. Welcome to the program, sir. Also joining us is veteran journalist and editor Padma Rao. Padma has core expertise in reporting Sri Lanka among several other beats, so it's great to have her with us on a very, what I know is a very busy day for her. Sumant Raman, who's of course an analyst and a commentator based out of Tamil Nadu, joins us as well, and veteran diplomat Ambassador Manju Seth is with us. Thank you very much, everybody. Let me start with you, Padma Rao, if I may, because I know you've been working those phone lines to your friends and to diplomats and politicians in Sri Lanka. We were hoping to have our Sri Lankan guests with us, but the technology is militating against this. How bad is it, and how has Sri Lanka got here?
It's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. There's very little petrol. There's hardly any diesel. There's no cooking gas. There's no milk powder. There are no medical supplies. There are long queues snaking outside medical stores and outside petrol pumps, as the pictures you would have seen when External Affairs Minister Jaishankar arrived there. This is not something that has happened overnight. Apparently, I was talking to people yesterday, and they say that this is a situation which developed, set in really around Christmas last year, and it was foreseen by many people because external debt has been accumulating for quite some time in Sri Lanka. And also, it's easy to sort of, I mean, of course, as journalists, we ask the question: can it be blamed on any one political dispensation? Apparently not. This is a cumulative result of the economic policies that Sri Lanka has followed overall during the length of its history as an independent socialist republic. So the problems are many. They're compounded, and they're not restricted to one administration or any, just the external debt alone. So yes, Bakha, it is bad, and as you can see, we're not able to get through to anyone, as I've been trying all day.
Yes, and that is, a lot of people feel and might feel in our audience that we're speaking on behalf of the Sri Lankans. We're not. We very much want and are trying to get the Sri Lankan voices on our program. So just know that technology and the fact that internet lines, mobile phone lines are down in Sri Lanka is really obstructing us at this point. Now, Padma, before I open this up, the question is before India is how should we respond? We've obviously opened our financial coffers immediately, but we have, as always, and the government will be thinking about this. The Chinese sort of dragon, as it were, looming large. Sri Lanka has also asked China for help. Some reports have suggested that China has turned its back on Sri Lanka, but China would also be very mindful of its geopolitical and strategic interests in Sri Lanka.
I think several things have changed with the Chinese approach to Sri Lanka ever since the setting up of various Indo-Pacific organizations. That's the one thing that has happened. The other thing that has happened is, I think, just the accumulation of external debt, as Sri Lankans themselves have been telling me, has somewhat put China off. Let's not forget that it's only 10% of the overall accumulated debt that is really vis-a-vis China. Though the impression has been created that this is a much larger geopolitical crisis, and that that we know of China's debt trap diplomacy, and certainly Sri Lanka is part of the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative. But China has also invested quite a lot of money there, billions of dollars. So it is also now waiting to see returns, for those investments. And so that is one thing. The other thing, what can India do? I think India, this is a golden opportunity. I don't want to make this sound cynical, because, like you, my thoughts are with the Sri Lankans. And as a national of India, I'm very proud that we have an opportunity to do something substantial for the Sri Lankans. So I do see that, in fact, today during Mr. Jaishankar's ongoing visit, there was another request. Reports suggest of another tranche of $1 billion as a loan. So that may also come through. And they have also, of course, signed, this power station which China was looking to build in the Jaffna Peninsula. Apparently, that project has now been handed over to India. We saw this signing of those papers. So India is making moves. It may seem to many Lankans, there is a growing anti-India sentiment, but that's always been there, as Sri Lankans tell me. In fact, Barkha, as you know, that's there in all the neighboring countries of India. So
I mean,
that
I'm,
is,
I'm, I'm actually reminded of what happened in Nepal when the earthquake
yes,
happened.
precisely.
There are parallels there. Yeah.
Yeah, so they do see, obviously the average Sri Lankan on the street feels that, maybe the country is giving away strategic favors in exchange for the loans and the money. But that's, so far, I think India's treading very cautiously and very sensitively. And I hope it stays that way.
Let me open this up to the ambassador. Ambassador, how should India be responding, and are we on the right course? We have to also remember that while our hearts remain with what's happening with the Sri Lankan people, there is China already entrenched with its influence at Sri Lanka's ports in particular. China has long used its resources to further its expansionist impulse, and it would be doing so right now. And Nepal is, in fact, again and again an instructive example of what China can do at moments such as these. Ambassador, it's over to you.
Yes, absolutely. We have seen our experience in all our neighboring countries. How China's approach has been and how China has been. And you've heard of this long spoken about, pearls of circle of pearls, and surrounding India, necklace of pearls. But I think we also need to we are on the right path, but yes, we need to keep in mind sensitivities of our neighbors, because they do have a kind of, as mentioned by the previous speaker, they do have some kind of animosity or some kind of feeling of why can India, why should India not treat us like this? We should treat it as equals. But at the same time, they have to understand bigger neighbor, smaller neighbor. The equation will not be absolutely equal, but we have to continue to convince them and to take them along with us. And I feel that they are beginning to understand now a little bit, especially given their experience with China of about 2 decades of financial and economic cooperation with China. They're beginning to understand, especially in Sri Lanka, that maybe their policy of handling their Sri Lankans handling their economic activity, economic relation with China was not absolutely the best. And also there have been these in the background. There's also been other sort of players, and when we see the government there, and when the government changes, a pro-India government or an so-called anti-India government coming into power, we do see how the relationship goes up and down, and this has been happening over the years. And India has always tried to be positive, take it in a positive light, and we've
But
been,
well, at the moment, you have a very pro-India government. You have the Rajapaksa
yes,
brothers in all key
yes,
positions. So, but that,
absolutely,
of course, doesn't necessarily translate
exactly.
down to the people's sentiment.
Yes, people are still little, they have some degree of animosity, while at the same time expecting India to help them out. They want us to help out, and India is, I think, rightly saying, all right, we will give you whatever your needs are. We will come maximum, we will, line of credit will be given, loan will be given. And whereas China, according to some reports, has been hesitating a little bit.
Yeah.
That has another message that the people will understand, they will get that India is in our neighbor and it is a friend of ours. So I think that message we have to reiterate, and we have to keep the people, the people to people level, and the people to people, and the humanitarian crisis that is happening there, which is really quite heartbreaking, because it was once such a thriving economy, and the tourism has been affected, everything has been affected, pandemic after the pandemic, and now this debt crisis that unfortunately Sri Lanka, maybe they're saying it's Sri Lanka is partly to blame, but whatever the reason is, the fact
Yeah.
is it is in trouble now, and I think India is responding, and India will respond in the right way to meet and resolve their problem.
Before I get General Ashok to come in on the sort of the military and the strategic dimensions, I want to bring in Sumant. What happens in Sri Lanka has typically always been a political issue in neighboring Tamil Nadu, and this has been so for decades. What is the kind of sentiment, if at all, that you're seeing building up in your state, Sumant? Can we unmute Sumant, please? Yeah.
Yeah, Barkha, I think that there is a kind of a feeling that, what happened in 2009, where, over 50,000 innocent Tamil civilians were killed by the Rajapaksa regime. And there is a feeling now that, karma is sort of playing itself out. I think that we also will have to realize that Sri Lanka, despite everything that India has done for it in the past, and let's face it, India did provide quote unquote support to the Sri Lankan government in the final days of the battle with the LTTE. That was a very open secret. In fact, the rumors were that the radar, facilities and so on were actually being monitored with the full support of India. So I think that despite that, the pronounced pro-China tilt was something that was sort of taken to an extreme stage by the Rajapaksa government. But and there is a feeling that they are not, at least the Rajapaksa family, are not a very dependable set of allies for India. As recently as February of last year, they cancelled the Colombo port terminal project, which was scheduled with the Adani Group. Then there was also cancellation of a oil storage terminal. So, I mean, while it is gratifying to see that some deals are being signed now and there is a movement away from China because of the present crisis situation where India is bailing them out, there is no guarantee whatsoever that once Sri Lanka comes out of this crisis, that is how they will continue to behave. And that
And,
is the
and
sad
and
part of it.
you also make the important point that just like we're talking about domestic sentiment in Sri Lanka, within Tamil Nadu, there has been strong sentiment against the Rajapakse brothers, in particular because of the crackdown on the Tamil-speaking minorities in Sri Lanka.
There has been a sentiment against the Rajapaksa family in particular, because they were at the helm when the actual genocide of the Tamil population happened. Look, there isn't a great deal of support or sentiment in support of the LTT. I mean, that went after the assassination of Rajiv Gandhi in Tamil Nadu. That sort of whittled down to a few fringe groups alone. But having said that, there was the feeling that the Indian government did not do enough. And in fact, that is something that the DMK even today is struggling to sort of, explain to the people why they did nothing when innocent civilians were killed, were bombed into the ground. So I think that sentiment is still there in Tamil Nadu, that the distinction between the LTTE and the innocent Tamil population should have been made. Those 50,000, some say the numbers are higher, some the Sri Lankan government says it's lower, but whatever, very, very sizable number of innocent Tamil population who were slaughtered in the final days of the conflict should have been saved, and
And
India did not do enough. That is something that
I,
is very strong.
and I'm nodding not in agreement, but in acknowledgement of the fact that there is a multi-layered sentiment when it comes to Sri Lanka, just as there is one in Sri Lanka vis-a-vis India. Let me bring in General Kumar at this point. The geopolitics, the Chinese have long been the moving force behind several key ports in Sri Lanka. Now Sri Lanka is in need. You heard Suman saying that there's a sense, at least in the southern state of Tamil Nadu, that the Rajapaksas are not dependable. There is, however, a very, very good personal rapport between the Rajapaksa brothers and several key members of the Modi government. Go ahead, General Ashok.
If you really see, while all other speakers have spoken candidly about the economic issues, and there are reasons as to why we should help Sri Lanka on economic count as being a good neighbor, and there are n number of things which we can count on. But the real reason is we have to take care of Sri Lanka, not for Sri Lanka, but for our own strategic interest. What needs to be understood that 80% of oil which China is getting from Arab countries is passing through Indian Ocean, and there is a choke point in form of Malacca Strait which is just 2 miles wide at its narrowest point. India had a distinct advantage because of Andaman and Nicobar Islands, predominantly the Nicobar Islands, to choke that should a situation and conflict arise. But with Hamban Tota being given to China by Sri Lanka for 99 years lease, which is located on the southern portion of Sri Lanka, and now Colombo port also being given to them for 99 years lease, and it's around 267 square kilometers being prepared in a manner wherein no rules regulations of Sri Lanka will probably hold any sway. And therefore, as we progress in time, the possibility of Sri Lanka getting naval ships from China in these two ports cannot repeat, cannot be ruled out. And if that happens, or even that facility gets developed in some manner,
Yeah. General Kumar, we'll just reconnect with you. Your line froze a little bit there, but I think you make the very important point about us needing as a nation to look out for our own interests. Padma, do you want to jump in there?
Yes, I just wanted to actually point out that since we did go all the way back to the final stages of the war in May 2009, and I was a war correspondent, as you know, I covered the war for 16 years on the ground. And when I was researching my book, I found that what actually happened at that time is that the real help came. Let's not forget that India had a coalition government at that time, which was heavily dependent on its Tamil Nadu allies. And as Sumant pointed out, there are several factions among those allies who were using basically the so-called support for the Sri Lankan Tamils. I'll come to what the Sri Lankan Tamils themselves think about that. But the real help, I mean, in terms of hard, planes and hardware, military hardware, came from China and Pakistan, and that is something that decisively helped them win the war. What India did provide were things like so-called soft equipment, radars and jackets and gloves and things like that. It's mainly because we had a coalition government in Delhi which dithered over offering any kind of overt support to the Sri Lankan armed forces at that time. Then the other point I wanted to make is that, there is if you travel in the northern and eastern provinces, as I did for my book, Sri Lanka, the New Country, which is based on my 16 years of covering the war, you will find that, when you talk to Tamils there, they have a completely different opinion of Tamil Nadu support. They call it, they say that they call it Karve Pulle politics, the curry leaf politics. What they say is that the Tamil Nadu politicians use us like the curry leaf, the Karve Pulle. They put us into a curry when they need us for their own use, and they pull us out when the flavor is done. So there is a very big dichotomy between what we think the Sri Lankan Tamils think
It's a
of our
great
Tamils.
it's
Yeah.
a great point, Padma, because I can see Suman's hand going up, but I'm reminded of every election in Tamil Nadu where when Prabhakaran was still alive, you'd have Prabhakaran would sometimes be mentioned in politics, and when he was killed, there was actually some sort of forced sympathy at one point. Sumant, we're all old enough to remember that. You're disagreeing, Sumant. What are you
And
actually
just
wanting to say?
Actually,
just
Yeah, sorry.
let me tell
Yeah.
you. I was in a place near Madurai when the news actually came in when Prabhakaran was killed. You know, everybody said that this whole state will shut down, there's going to be violence and this and that. And let me tell you, on the ground, actually nothing happened. Nothing happened. So
No, no,
that
that's why
was
curry leaf politics, right? It's
no,
just to
no,
stir
no.
the pot, as it were.
Absolutely. So there is a cynical exploitation by
Yes,
certain elements in Tamil Nadu of the
yes.
Sri Lankan Tamils' plight. And let me tell you, those who are now protesting against Indian fishermen's, movement into Sri Lankan waters are Tamil fishermen. They are not Sinhalese fishermen. By and large, it is the fishermen from the Jaffna Peninsula who are literally requesting their government to take a harder line against the Indian Tamil fishermen who are depriving them of their catch.
Let me bring in Padma to complete her point, and then General Kumar to complete his point on the ports, and then we'll get the ambassador in. Padma, just complete your argument.
Actually, it kind of slipped my
No,
mind
you
now. I
were
don't know what
making
I
the
was going to say.
point of the
Yeah.
curry leaf, the fact that the perception of Tamil Nadu's
Yes,
politicians, and yeah, yeah.
yes. Yeah, exactly. I remember. So what I wanted to say is that we had coalition pressures in Delhi, so Delhi was not that involved, and also Barkha, as Delhi, the center has largely been dominated by North Indian politicians. There has never been such a great interest in South India, let alone in Sri Lanka. That compounded by the fact that we had a coalition. And the very last point about this Karve Pullai politics is that there used to be a very famous editor whom you also know, the late Cho Ramaswamy.
Mhm.
And Cho had Tughlaq, and the minute the war ended, he sent an army of his own journalists to. Now, some might argue that he was a very close pal of the late Jayalalitha, and she was, kind of, she didn't think much of the LTT. She didn't want to do this kind of support and all that. But the point is, he sent an army of journalists there who came back, who spent a quantity of time in the northern and eastern provinces doing exactly what I did, researching to see how they feel about Tamil Nadu. And they came back with a set of very revealing essays, which they, put together. And they themselves were rather surprised. They didn't expect to find that kind of, it's not animosity, but it's just a kind of
A
Tamil
healthy
Nadu tends
skeptic,
to be
a
a bit of a
healthy,
joke. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
a bit of a joke. Okay, meaning not taken seriously in terms of its its its,
Not
its
Tamil Nadu,
support.
this, yeah, not the state
Not
and
the
not the
state or the
people, but
people,
those
the
who,
politicians, the
yeah,
extreme
those who,
political voices.
yes,
General Kumar,
yes,
you're back with us, and you were
Cynicism.
making, yeah, cynicism. Fair
cynicism.
enough.
Yeah.
I just want to go to the general and ambassador now. General Kumar, you wanted to make the point about the ports and the Chinese control over the ports of Sri Lanka. Please go ahead, sir. General
So
Kumar, yeah, yeah.
I was highlighting Barkha that on one hand we had certain advantages in Indian Ocean, wherein because of Andaman and Nicobar's islands, we could choke Chinese traffic should a conflict situation so arise. But with Hambantota, which is located at southern port of Sri Lanka, being given to them for 99 years lease, now that advantage is going to be now taken off. Now China, if it is able to position its naval ships or other naval resources in due course of time, it will not only negate our positive influences, it will also negate the advantages which were coming in the way of Japan, Australia, and the current quad formulation, when that will get adversely affected. In
Yeah.
fact, we have to also take a note, though, of course, we are discussing Sri Lanka, what is happening on Maldives. We have certain advantages because of Lakshadweep group of islands there, but currently the dynamics of Maldives, which is turning. So again, there are challenges in the Indian Ocean. So I will leave the discussion on the economic assistance and humanitarian aid to my fellow speakers, but India needs to assist Sri Lanka for its own strategic need, crying need to keep the China out. China is a country which had only 1% contribution in the overseas development assistance of Sri Lanka, which has now grown to 23% of the total kitty. And now, having started on the pretext of the economic and trade business, now its entire interest is focused on the political and military advantages, and therefore that has to be taken note of. And this is an opportunity. I will not say that one should be opportunist, but this is an occasion where we can
Yeah.
speak to each other and resolve the perception and perceptual differences. come to aid of each other, and then build a larger good. In fact, I will close my this statement only to remind, because you might have to do this show sometime later. A lot of economies around our country are crumbling. Afghanistan is crumbling, Pakistan is crumbling, Nepal is crumbling, Sri Lanka, in any case, we are discussing, Maldives is also on the route. In fact, except Bangladesh and Bhutan, where we have a serious Indian connect, everything else around us is crumbling economically. And this is something which we have to see, because once a crisis has developed, then our capacity to interject and take corrective measures also reduces. So I think we have to, while in immediate time frame, look at the Sri Lanka's crisis and its handling, but we have to look at whatever is happening
I,
around us in a very serious manner.
I actually think that's a great point, and let me bring in Ambassador Manju at this point. The fact is that, as callous as it may sound at a humanitarian level, I think the general makes a good point that this is also something we need to do, not just altruistically, but for our own strategic security. Ambassador, go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. Maritime security for us is of prime importance. I'm sorry. And in the Indian Ocean, particularly, we had this strategic advantage over the years, but now we are fast seeing how that advantage, the Chinese are building in Gwadar port, and now in Sri Lanka, of course, and they were trying to even get Bangladesh to, to come here, to give their port to them. And so that definitely we are going to have a problem for India, for its security, maritime security particularly. And I think we really need to remember that preemptive measures, as mentioned by the general, also we need to take preemptive measures to get all our neighbors, and including and particularly Sri Lanka, which is now in this economic crisis situation, that we need to bail them out, and help to develop their economy also. I think we need to take a little more proactive sort of
And of course, we
action.
have to see how the Chinese might respond. The Chinese might
And
double
see,
the money that India is putting in. Like there could
yes.
be a kind of competitive rebuilding of Sri Lanka, and therefore, actually, we're going to have to manage our own relationship with the Chinese at some point to address all of these issues. Whether it's what's happening with the Quad, our response on Russia, or Sri Lanka, it's an explosion of geopolitical challenges at the same time, and opportunities in all of them as well. Let's get real. Sumant, before I give Padma now the last word, how is this? Are people talking about this in Tamil Nadu? Are politicians getting active about it at all, or is this an ignored? And there we lost Sumant right on cue. Let me bring in Padma with the point she wanted to make. Padma, go ahead. Yeah. Padma, sorry, you're on mute. I don't know. We need
Got
to
it. Yeah,
unmute Padma.
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I did. So just three quick points. One is that, Sri Lanka is now practically being sort of forced, if you like, because not many people want to do that, to talk to the IMF to restructure debt.
Yes.
Because as I said,
Yes.
most of its debt is sovereign bonds. And through that restructuring, everybody knows, and it is not, it won't be unexpected if there are certain strategic favors, perhaps, or, not so, but very subtly sort of demanded of Sri Lanka. And I think to that extent, the Chinese are watching and waiting. So I don't agree that the Chinese are, going to send military ships to Hambantota. It has not happened. I've been in Hambantota many, many times since before it was built even, and I've seen it coming up. And that's not, there is a huge Chinese presence there, people who have built the port and all that, but military ships, I don't think the Chinese would risk that right now. They're still in watch and wait mode. The second thing is the port city, this enormous port city. I think they sunk about, $1.5 billion or something, the Chinese in that port city, and there is nobody using it. It's this big white elephant. They had some sort of a rock festival there recently, but that's about it. So this needs people to come in and invest and use this port city. So I think Sri Lanka will be looking to India and Japan and many other countries to also come and make it sort of pay for itself. And the final point I want to make is actually something positive about the current dispensation in India. Prime Minister Modi's, not only does his government have the advantage of being in a majority, but what he has done from the beginning of his policy is towards Sri Lanka has been very pragmatic. I was rather surprised that he dispensation after dispensation in India has always, just stressed on the fact that we're supporting the Hindu Sri Lankan Tamils. Let's not forget the LTT. Most of the leadership was Christian, not even Hindu. But that's a moot point. The point is that finally we have a government. When PM Modi went to Sri Lanka, one of the first few trips he made was in fact for Vesak Day, for the Buddha's birthday. And they have now decided to finally get pragmatic and recognize that the majority population in Sri Lanka is the Buddhist majority. So that the engagement between the government of India in Delhi and Sri Lanka has improved in leaps and bounds under the Prime Minister Modi's government. That's partly due, of course, as I said, because the majority that they have, a comfortable majority, but also because of a pragmatism that has come into Indian politics and policies towards Sri Lanka.
And you're going to, when I say you, I mean the government, and we as a nation are going to need dollops of that pragmatism right now, from Russia to Sri Lanka. To God knows what's going to happen in Pakistan next. The entire neighborhood is actually in turbulence. So we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you, Padma. Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, General. Thank you, Sumant. And with apologies to our friends in Sri Lanka, those of you who have the internet would have tuned in to see what we're saying about your country. We were not able to get voices from Sri Lanka to share your perspective, just because the internet and the phone lines are down. But we hope to have more follow-up shows and rectify that very soon. Thank you for watching. See you tomorrow. Goodbye. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.